que ça ira maintenant, espérons. Je pense qu'on est bon maintenant. On est en ligne. I will send the link here for everyone to share it. Try with this link, please. Essayez avec ce lien, s'il vous plaît. Or you can go directly on the MFNS Facebook page and you will find normally the Facebook Live directly and you will take the link and share it.
Oui, c'est un lien qui a été envoyé à tout le monde ou c'est uniquement entre nous ce lien-là?
Uniquement entre nous.
Oui, mais c'est un peu embêtant parce que nous, on a diffusé un lien là, à des tas de gens avant. Hein.
Mais ça a été de toutes les façons coupé parce que j'ai arrêté. Ça
Je viens
fonctionnait
de
pas.
me connecter sans le lien. Je suis allée sur la page Facebook et je me suis connectée.
Ça va, ça marche?
Oui, oui, ça marche.
Oui, ok, ça
Bon,
marche.
Lien,
Bon, je
directement.
repartage moi et bon,
Voilà.
c'est pas grave.
Bon, ben, je partage mon écran alors.
Ok.
Voilà.
Très bien.
Tu me dis quand je peux démarrer. Hein.
Oui, bien sûr. C'est toi qui as cheval sur... Très bien.
Tu peux commencer quand tu veux.
Oui. Et
Vous
le
m'entendez?
message, cette conversation va être enregistrée. Hein,
Vous m'entendez?
Oui,
Très
oui,
bien.
oui, oui.
Okay, so thanks very much to the organizer for the kind invitation today. I will talk about the ability or not of Mediterranean diet to be a nutritional approach for COVID-19. As you can see here, World Health Organization has proposed on its website nutrition advice for adults during COVID-19 outbreak. They propose proper nutrition, hydration as vital, a well-balanced diet, which could be healthier for stronger immune system and lower risk of chronic illnesses. So it's more for the consequences of the lockdown than to prevent COVID, in fact. And they propose to eat a variety of fresh and processed food with vitamins, minerals, dietary fiber, protein, antioxidants, etc. And they also propose to summary that a flyer which can be downloaded on the website of WHO. Eat fresh and processed food every day, eat moderate amounts of fat and oil, drink enough water every day, eat less salt and sugar, and avoid eating out, and counseling psychosocial support. Very recently, in a review published in Nutrition Reviews in 2021, other dietary recommendations have been proposed. And as you can see, this healthy diet looks like a Mediterranean diet. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, healthy fats, and especially olive oil, low dairy sauces, lean meat, whole grain, adequate hydration. It looks like a Mediterranean diet. For women breastfeeding, which is considered to be the best for the infant, including women with COVID. And the role of this kind of healthy diet is to prevent consequences of lockdown and to stimulate the immune system. And it's proposed to add, if necessary, zinc, selenium, vitamin C, and D in groups at risk for deficiency. So from this recommendation, can we or not say that Mediterranean diet is useful during COVID-19? I think it's not really necessary to remind you the Mediterranean diet pyramid, but you can see it. It looks quite like what has been proposed on the previous slide. What could be useful in a Mediterranean diet towards COVID? It's rich in polyphenols, and polyphenols have an anti-inflammatory effect by acting on LPase, interleukin-1 beta, TNF-alpha, and Wnt signaling. And polyphenols have been shown to decrease the inflammation pathway via NF-kappa B and to decrease the beta-catenin pathway too. Flavonoids, which are also present in Mediterranean diet, act by acting to decrease the effect of toll-like receptor 4, which is stimulated during COVID. They act via pathogen-associated molecular patterns and via damage-associated molecular patterns. They also act by decreasing the signaling pathway of interleukin-1 receptor and interleukin-6 receptor by acting on NF-kappa B, NRF2, and STAT1 and 2. Long-chain omega-3 fatty acid, which are contained in fatty fishes, act towards toll-like receptor, and they decrease insulin receptor pathway of the toll-like receptor 4. They also act on signaling pathway of TNF-alpha. They bind to GPR 120, which is a receptor of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, and they decrease inflammatory pathway via IKK beta and JNK pathway. Currently, there is an ongoing study about omega-3 inflammation and COVID. This study, which is currently ongoing, is called COVID Omega F, and the result will be available not before many months. Here you have a very recent systematic review and meta-analysis about the relation between 25-hydroxyvitamin D and SARS-CoV. Here, 30 articles were included in the meta-analysis. And what was observed was that 25-EHD was lower in patients with COVID as compared to a patient without COVID. 25-hydroxy-D was lower in patients with severe disease of COVID and in those who died of COVID-19. And patients with prior vitamin D deficiency had an increased risk of developing severe disease, but not of developing a fatal outcome. So there is certainly a link between 25-hydroxy-D and COVID, and especially its severity. But the conclusion of the meta-analysis that these studies are observational in nature and that does not allow to establish a cause-effect relationship. It's an important point. There is no ACT about that. Treatment with vitamin D might be considered for primary prevention and management of patients, but currently without true proof, and further intervention studies are needed. Here, collected in a Cochrane meta-analysis by Duchiantine, all the effect of vitamin D on acute respiratory tract infections except COVID. And all that meta-analysis and studies conclude that there is a protective effect of 25-hydroxyvitamin D towards acute respiratory tract infection, but it's not COVID pulmonary infection. Another point is to know if is lockdown for COVID changed or not food habits. There is an important Italian survey published in 2020 in numerous Italian people, which shows here in black a decrease in dressing sauces, a small decrease in salted snacks, a huge decrease in spirits, decrease in wine and beer, decrease in sweet beverages, an increase in hot beverages, a decrease in processed meat, an increase in white meat, an increase in legumes, an increase in preserved fish and frozen fish, but a decrease in fresh foods, an increase in eggs, in dairy products and milk and yogurt. And a huge decrease in delivery food, decrease in packaging sweets, decrease in packaging baked products, a huge increase in homemade sweets, in homemade pizza, in fresh bread, in cereals, decrease in nuts, and no change in fresh vegetable, a little increase and decrease in fresh food. When looking at a Mediterranean diet adherence score in this survey, it was shown that this score increased significantly from 6.53 to 7.34 during the confinement, so that Italian people tended to eat more Mediterranean diet during lockdown than before. Here you have a Spanish study and a study performed in 23 OCDE countries. Here in Spain, they found a negative correlation between a Mediterranean diet adherence score and COVID cases and deaths. You can see here in an univariate model a significant negative correlation about cases, and the same in multivariate model, significant for cases. And it was also significant for deaths from COVID here in a univariate model and multivariate model here in Spain. When they looked at 23 OECD countries, they found similarly a decrease in deaths from COVID, but no significant effect in cases of COVID-19. So, to conclude, there is currently no evidence-based proof that med diet has a protective role towards COVID-19. There is no ACT about that. However, its components, especially polyphenols, flavonoids, long-chain omega-3 and vitamin D, may help because of their anti-inflammatory and immune effects. It would also be more protective towards the metabolic and weight consequences of lockdowns. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Professor Larue.
Vas-y, Amine.
Thanks. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. We will have time to discuss and to ask questions later in the discussion session. Now, I will invite Professor Youssef Abu Salah to present also another presentation in the topic of Mediterranean diet and COVID-19. And as he said before, he will talk about Mediterranean diet, brain, and COVID-19. So I invite him to share his presentation and to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Amine, I'm trying to share.
Je crois, Amine, qu'il faudrait réserver un petit temps à la traduction en français de la conclusion de Jacques.
Is it online?
Oui, c'est online, mais on le voit.
I mean, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Amine, tu m'as entendu, Amine?
Oui. Je pense qu'on devrait faire ça dans la discussion. Là, je pense que tout le monde va comprendre les conclusions de l'un et de l'autre.
Parce qu'il y en a qui ne comprennent pas l'anglais déjà. Donc, rien que la conclusion, un petit... Mais sinon, Jacques peut le faire en français aussi. Un petit résumé.
S'il veut le faire maintenant, ou alors on peut le laisser, je pense, à la discussion, comme ça.
C'est pas lui de choisir.
On laisse à la discussion.
Oui, très bien.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks to the whole staff here to launch the first scientific activity of the Mediterranean Federation on Nutrition Science. It's really a good pleasure to start sometime. So it's good to start now with a scientific event just like this and take opportunity of this COVID, hoping that the sky will be clear very, 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 very soon. Thank you very much. My intervention is called Mediterranean Diet, Brain Nutrition, COVID-19. I think I'm going to repeat Jack for many slides probably, but I will try to. Well, the first contact of myself with this Mediterranean food consumption is when I was called to write a paper on low environmental impacts and significant health nutrition benefits of this Mediterranean food called the Mediterranean diet. And we realized that it has only health effects, specific nutrition added value, but it has also a low environmental impact, which means that the UNESCO has put it or added it as a sustainable diet. It was a proposition, and then it's in the human patrimony called the human cultural heritage that this is something we have to share. The Mediterranean diets belong to everybody. And of course, yes, it belongs to geographically to this contour, I mean, of the Mediterranean, but it belongs also to the whole humanity as a patrimony. I want to go further to recall that Jacques has already said, in all the stages of this Mediterranean diet, probably on my left, you have some wine or some tea, if you want. Red tea also could make, of course, I mean, similarity with the red wine, because it's also a question of polyphenols, of catechins and resveratrol, which is in the grapes. But at the right, I mean, you have the same. You have also at the basics, you have some cultural or some social habit of eating, which is very important. You have also some dancing there. We have some jamming. I mean, we have also physical activity. This is also belongs to the culture, the food culture of Mediterranean region. This is very important. It's not only a question of chemicals and food, but it's also a question of culture and social and how we do it together. It is obvious now that Mediterranean diet has so many positive health effects. Among them, we can just mention that it could reduce cardiovascular mortalities by lowering your cholesterol, by decreasing your blood triglycerides and reducing inflammation, which is also already mentioned by my colleague Jack. It will reduce also neurodegenerative diseases, just like Alzheimer and Parkinson, which are the neurodegenerative illness, which have a common etiology. It's not the same, but it has some common factors, which is oxidation in the brain and inflammation and low-grade inflammation in the brain, which has to do with the polyphenols and flavonoids can do a lot of work, positive work in there. Some work also have talked about reducing depression and reduction of diabetes by improving the sensibility and sensitivity of receptors of insulin. And some work also was done on how Mediterranean diets could improve your cognition, just like executive functions, just like memory, perception, attention. Of course, these are not cause-effect studies. Mainly, they are either observational or just cross-sectional studies, but there is a relationship, and sometimes it's very significant between cognition and the eating Mediterranean. Projects also against some cancers, breast and prostate was the most one studied. And the most important of all, that in some areas of the Mediterranean, you will find people who are living longer and healthier. And of course, it adds you to lose some weight because you have a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, and you don't have too dense nutrition, energetic nutrition that could put on the pounds on your body. Just to give you what is the risk factors of cognitive decline, there is among them the modifiable ones and the non-modifiable ones. So everything here that is, I mean, bad in terms of health, as hypertension, high cholesterol, dyslipidemia, type 2 diabetes, everything here is something that is, if you eat Mediterranean, you can, I mean, enhance the positive effects or lower the negative effects of this kind of health, parameters. It is healthy because you have a lot of fruits, vegetables, nuts, olive oil, okay? It has also a lot of antioxidant in it. But if you are just Jack said, if in terms of COVID, you may need some time to add in some chemicals, supplements, but better look at them and naturally, and you will find them in many legumes and fruits. Physical activity. Altogether, this, as Solferezi just resumed it, that it could be considered the first line of defense. I mean, those are the first line of defense against the development and progression of pre-dementia and dementia syndromes. So we're still in the cognitive register. The Mediterranean diet may, I don't want to get into, just as like Jack mentioned, very professionally, where it goes, which receptor is touched, what is going in the cell and everything. I would say it literally that Mediterranean diet facilitates brain metabolic control. Why? Because it is related to improving insulin sensitivity and the metabolism of glucose. Another action is that it helps to dampen oxidative stress and avoiding oxidative damage. Another third one is that it exerts an effect on cognitive health, okay, by, lowering all the unhealthy parameters, which are the cascades for many other health consequences. Let's just talk about obesity, hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, etc., etc. Just, the first step of my speech is that just to tell you that there is, a close relationship between nutrition and what I am referring here as neurodegenerative diseases, and vice versa. Okay, if you have Alzheimer or you have, I don't know, sclerosis, or you have anything else, it may also, have a lot of consequence on your metabolism, and by then may change many nutrition parameters in your body. Well, just to repeat it, if you take, for example, a specific food from the Mediterranean diet, you will find that it is very rich on very important things. For example, olive oil is rich in antioxidants, polyphenol. Fruits at the Mediterranean contour are very, very rich in vitamin A, B, C, and E. And then if you have nuts and seeds, they are very rich in minerals, amino acids, and omega-3 as oil seeds, etc. So it's very important. Then what is very important also that they have an effect on neuronal survival, energy metabolism, neurotrophin, and everything that is going to keep your brain healthy. And then also these elements will diminish your blood pressure, oxidative damage, and neuroinflammation. Okay, it looks like a repetition. Just to tell you that also they have fish consumption is very important because we are in the Mediterranean and we have a capacity of fishing and a patrimony of fishing, which is very important. So high fish consumption tends to be inversely associated with cognitive impairment and decline, okay? So because they are very rich in omega-3, just like fatty acid, and their consequences, which are like DHA and Eicosaph. Omega-3 reduce pro-inflammation mediators. Why? Because just like Jack said it, because they have numerous studies that have found that they are linked to the higher levels of pro-inflammatory production, including CRP, IL-6, and TNF-alpha as potential risk factors to cognitive decline. So the Mediterranean, parameters or antioxidants or omega-3, all this will diminish all this deleterious effect. Okay, let's not just repeat it because as we have seen in the previous, we have non-enzymatic antioxidants with vitamins, polyphenols, and you have some enzymatic antioxidants, which are selenium, vitamin D, copper, magnesium, and the Mediterranean diet is very rich in all this. This is in association, all this will prevent damage and repair reactive oxidative species damage in the brain. Okay. In terms of performance of our children if they are addicted, let's say addicted, or they adhere to the Mediterranean diet, their performance in terms of academic performance in cognition, there are some studies also that reveal that the performance will be up if they are addicted to the Mediterranean diet. If they follow, is better to say it. Okay. It goes on with some examples on the impact of Mediterranean diet on physical activity. Then in the in-depth of our subject, we are now here on COVID-19. Mediterranean diet contains a lot of bioactive substances which have a potential role in combating COVID-19. Okay. So I wouldn't. Just to see it at the bottom, you have micronutrients and bioactive substances can be considered alternative nutrition approach as they. What are they doing? They inhibit proteases such as papain-like protease, 3 chymotrypsin-like protease, and RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. This is very important. They have also anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antiviral properties. They can boost their immune system and help to mitigate clinical failures, and have great potential to interfere with spike glycoproteins. And this is very important, especially for SARS-CoV in general and for COVID-19 in particular, this SARS-CoV-2, because they will interfere with spike glycoproteins, angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is the main entry of the virus into our cells. This is a study done by Jangella. Okay, they found that, I think also Judge mentioned that home habits, we retrieved the home habits of cooking when we are locked down. And this study would find that cooking at home and adherence to the Mediterranean diet during the COVID confinement. This is a Croatian study, in Croatia. And you have the 3 levels here, the blue one, they see the brown one and the gray one, okay, in terms of adherence to Mediterranean diet. Gray one is high and low one is blue. And you have this radar representation, which is, how, each item of food is affected, by the lockdown, especially. So you find that the people who have low adherence of Mediterranean diet, they eat very, very, very low of the very important, this all the parameters, of the positive parameters of the vegetable diet. And inversely, they would find that they eat, unfortunately, they are very, very high, tendency here, I'm just following, I'm sorry. Here, I had tendency to eat delivered food, fast food, and the restaurants because they are not following the Mediterranean diet. Here, just a comparison in terms of Mediterranean diets, and it's in Navarro, somewhere in Spain here, which is that you have here 2 different populations. You have everybody, all, and then you have excluding health professionals, okay? And then it's a questionnaire on food frequency and everything like this. And you will find that which is, the more the percentage of SARS-CoV items, okay, in here, and then adherence to the Mediterranean diet. So the more you adhere to the Mediterranean diet, the less you will have, this COVID infections. I think you have seen this with it's the same one as just Jack to present it. The negative association, or this is the effect, the odd ratio here, You see the odd ratio here is very positive, it's a protector, okay? So the Mediterranean diet is a protector, is highly protecting from infection to COVID in this kind of study in Spain. Another study here is that adherence to Mediterranean diets and some lifestyle among women with type 1 diabetes from Northeast Poland. This is just to tell you that the Mediterranean diet, as I said, enhanced insulin sensitivity and allows the receptor to welcome well, glucose. And then I won't go into all what just Jack said, which is the different receptors which are there. But just to gain some time, I will go faster here. And then you have, just as I said first, that there is a link between Mediterranean diet and academic performance. This is all related, okay? This is kind of related, and every part in the Mediterranean diet has some effects either on, I don't know, health, or coronary health, or in the brain, or and everything else. Okay. Just to name it again, it was the advice to follow, to have a good health, eat a lot of vegetables, change the way you think about meat. Okay, we're not saying here that you have to limit your meat or maybe change the way, because at least, I mean, minimize, I mean, don't eat too much red meat, okay? Okay, because you prefer white meat, okay? This is the idea of reflection about this sentence, because we are associating also here Mediterranean diet as a sustainable diet, and then we're thinking about the environment, because red meat has a high impact, environmental impact in terms of calories and the water and everything, and gas emission also. Okay. Thank you very much. Not to abuse of your time. Thank you very much to you, Amin.
Merci, merci Youssef. Merci, merci professeur Abou Salah. Oui, donc on laisse la discussion à la fin, je crois. Est-ce que on fera la même chose avec Jacques, donc on laissera un petit résumé à la fin en français pour nos collègues qui n'arrivent pas quand même à comprendre.
Oui, je pense qu'on laisse ça pour plus tard, pour la discussion, oui, à la fin de cette thématique. Okay, and now it's Dr. Didier Cos who will do a presentation on micronutrition in COVID-19. Donc, bienvenue, Dr. Didier Cos, et je vous laisse la parole. Didier Chos, désolé, voilà. Didier Chos.
Ouais. Est-ce que vous voyez ma diapo?
Oui.
Ouais.
Bon.
Prévention précoce du Covid.
Voilà, parfait. Eh bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous. On va faire un petit point sur la situation concernant les observations que l'on a pu faire en micronutrition sur la prévention, surtout précoce, on dira un mot. On sait que dans cette période, depuis 1 an et demi, on a eu des travaux absolument extraordinaires sur la connaissance de cette maladie. On sait également que c'est une maladie dont l'expression a pu démontrer son importance dans le domaine des maladies déjà existantes, notamment des maladies chroniques. On parle déjà au-delà de la pandémie, d'une syndémie, parce que les gens étaient déjà les plus fragiles sont déjà malades avant de tomber malades. Et si on regarde un petit peu les différents états de santé, en partant de la pleine santé jusqu'à la maladie, jusqu'aux pathologies, jusqu'aux comorbidités, il est évident qu'on a pu tous observer que des formes asymptomatiques jusqu'aux formes graves, hospitalisables, en réanimation, voire provoquant le décès des patients atteints, on avait probablement une augmentation du risque, une augmentation de la gravité, dont certains travaux ont pu démontrer qu'il y avait un noyau commun de tous les personnes qui étaient très à risque, comme les gens qui avaient des obésités graves, les gens qui présentaient des troubles au niveau des microbiotes, les maladies auto-immunes, le cancer, ou les personnes âgées malades, où d'évidence la gravité progresser, d'autant plus que l'inflammation devait être de plus en plus importante. Donc, il y a vraiment un noyau commun de la gravité de cette maladie, avec un terrain inflammatoire probablement préexistant à la maladie. Et ça fait tout l'intérêt du travail qui est présenté aujourd'hui sur la prévention des états de santé de ce type-là par des modèles alimentaires de type méditerranéen. En ce qui concerne l'évolution de cette maladie, on s'est intéressé à ce qu'on appelle maintenant les séquelles post-Covid ou le Covid long, puisqu'on a vu apparaître un certain nombre, et très précocement, un certain nombre de troubles post-Covid. Et dès, on va dire, octobre 2020, c'est un premier travail de l'équipe de Liam Thompson à Dublin, qui avait montré que sur cette étude, qui était relativement modeste, sur 128 participants, il y avait déjà 52% qui avaient fait état d'une fatigue persistante et ce qui troublait les observateurs, c'est que quelle que soit la gravité de la maladie initiale, on pouvait trouver donc ces syndromes de fatigue post-Covid. Ça a intéressé beaucoup les spécialistes des syndromes de fatigue chroniques post-infectieux et qui ont déjà observé ces phénomènes-là à la suite d'atteintes virales notamment, et on connaît bien les syndromes de fatigue post-Epstein-Barr, mononucléose infectieuse ou post-cytomégalovirus. Et également, il faut noter que dans l'histoire en 2003 du SRAS, il y avait bien sûr beaucoup moins pandémique que le Covid-19, mais on a observé presque 40% plusieurs années après de syndrome de fatigue post-chronique. Donc, ce n'est pas le Covid qui a inauguré ce problème. Alors, des initiatives ont été rapidement prises, et notamment, il faut noter celle dès octobre 2020 de l'hôpital Foch, à l'initiative du docteur Barizien, qui a créé une consultation post-Covid et qui a proposé tout un protocole de travail, de recherche et d'examen tout à fait intéressant, puisqu'il notait la perte de poids, évidemment, les symptômes en relation avec les problèmes d'hyperventilation respiratoire, les problèmes liés aux problèmes de stress post-traumatique, et puis de perte de masse musculaire, de masse maigre notamment, par des tests de force musculaire au niveau des membres inférieurs. C'est une fois les tests et le diagnostic de Covid long posé, des protocoles associant des mesures diététiques, des mesures de rééducation fonctionnelle, respiratoire et physique, musculaire, sont proposés, et également avec des approches neuropsychologiques pour aider les gens qui étaient en difficulté. Un peu plus tard, des travaux ont essayé de lister un petit peu l'ensemble des manifestations post-Covid qui étaient observées. Il y a notamment cette étude COMPARE qui a montré que les manifestations étaient très nombreuses, puisque ça montait jusqu'à 50 manifestations relativement fréquentes. Mais parmi ces 50 manifestations, il est évident que le symptôme fatigue post-infectieux est un phénomène majeur et qui est généralement le problème numéro 1 présenté par les patients. La HAS a, dès le mois de février de cette année, proposé des recommandations au niveau de la prise en charge. La prise en charge sur le plan diagnostique, avec des propositions faites aux ensembles des médecins qui s'occupent de ces problèmes-là, avec notamment des échelles de fatigue, celle de Schalder qui est intéressante, et puis les scores anxiété-dépression, le HAD, puis le test de MOCA, qui est un test intéressant et qui d'origine canadienne et qui prend tous les éléments à la fois d'anxiété, de dépression, mais également cognitifs. Les scores de douleur. Les scores de douleur et notamment les scores de douleur neuropathiques, et enfin l'évaluation de la dyspnée. Donc ces tests sont vraiment extrêmement utiles pour tous les médecins qui, devant leurs patients, veulent faire des diagnostics, et à l'issue de ces diagnostics, peu de propositions thérapeutiques sont proposées. Et en ce qui concerne nos habitudes de conseils alimentaires, d'activité physique, de gestion du stress, et éventuellement couplées à des approches personnalisées de complémentation micronutritionnelle ou à base de plantes, aujourd'hui, il n'y a aucune recommandation de fait, puisque aucune évaluation de ces possibilités-là ont été réalisées. Quand on regarde les symptômes les plus fréquents selon la Haute Autorité de Santé, nous avons, dans la réflexion que nous avons menée auprès de nos amis qui travaillent en micronutrition, on a essayé de faire le lien qu'il pouvait y avoir entre les symptômes présentés et le modèle fonctionnel qui relie les habitudes alimentaires aux perturbations fonctionnelles les plus fréquemment rencontrées chez nos patients. Et on a remarqué qu'avec cette approche-là, finalement, dans les symptômes les plus fréquents, on avait bien un problème immunologique évident qui ressortait dans les signes généraux notamment et dans les signes respiratoires. Également des problèmes de la fonction neuropsychologique avec la fonction cerveau. Un problème digestif est probablement en relation avec toutes les études qui ont montré que l'état de nos microbiotes également perturbe de manière assez profonde le devenir de cette maladie. Et puis les autres problèmes que l'on peut ramener soit à l'intestin, soit aux différents problèmes immunitaires, aux problèmes inflammatoires, éventuellement aux problèmes d'hyperperméabilité intestinale. Donc, on est parti sur cette base-là pour regarder un petit peu quelles étaient les propositions physiopathologiques qui avaient été proposées. Alors, il y a des travaux intéressants qui avaient déjà été menés pour les syndromes de fatigue post-infectieux non-Covid, et notamment de l'équipe de Shungu qui avait démontré, et qui l'a démontré également dans le Covid, qu'une baisse des réserves de défense antiradicalaire sont présentes chez les patients à risque. Et le grand méchant loup de cette histoire, c'est la coalition entre l'anion superoxyde et le monoxyde d'azote qui fabrique le peroxynitrite et qui attaque les membranes cellulaires et fabrique des molécules qu'on appelle les isoprostanes et qui ont un effet tout à fait inédit sur les membranes cellulaires des vaisseaux au niveau vasculaire, qui va entraîner une hypoxie tissulaire et en particulier au niveau musculaire. Et dans les hypothèses de syndrome de fatigue post-infection ou post-Covid, on observe la constitution d'un triptyque qui va tourner en rond, qui entraîne une dysfonction mitochondriale, une neuroinflammation et un stress oxydatif, qui tourne en rond et qui entraîne une fatigue, un état de fatigue qui est autant une fatigue centrale qu'une fatigue périphérique. Ça, c'est le premier élément qui avait déjà été signalé. Et puis, propre au Covid, on sait qu'il y a une dysfonction endothéliale qui crée d'ailleurs les problèmes d'inflammation vasculaire et les problèmes prothrombotiques qui peuvent être très graves en réanimation. Mais au niveau périphérique, il y a une vasoconstriction et une ischémie qui se posent. Donc, il y a un véritable problème vasculaire. Ce qui veut dire que la faiblesse de nos défenses antiradicalaires est un élément probablement très, très péjoratif pour présenter un syndrome de fatigue. Donc, quand on regarde ce triptyque avec la faiblesse de la capacité de pouvoir oxygéner nos cellules musculaires, ceci entraîne bien évidemment une problématique au niveau de la perte de masse maigre avec un terrain catabolique qui est probablement augmenté, exagéré par les syndromes inflammatoires ou les syndromes oxydatifs que présente ce type de patient. À côté de ça, le cerveau va être encore plus perturbé. On connaît maintenant le tropisme de ce virus pour les neurones. Donc, il y a vraiment un cercle vicieux qui s'installe dans cette pathologie. Alors, en pratique, qu'avons-nous fait? On a proposé à nos collègues qui travaillent avec nous en micronutrition de regarder quels sont les symptômes qui ont été au moment de l'infection et au moment de la consultation post-Covid. On a complété par des examens qu'on a l'habitude de faire en micronutrition, notamment avec les questionnaires fonctionnels. Et on a, avec nos questionnaires fonctionnels, proposé des questionnaires de santé psychologique, des questionnaires qui permettent de mesurer de manière précise la perte de masse musculaire et la perte surtout de force musculaire. Et à côté de ça, on a orienté les patients qui pouvaient le faire à des questionnaires, à des examens biologiques nutritionnels et fonctionnels, notamment sur le plan des marqueurs nutritionnels, sur le plan des marqueurs micronutritionnels qui s'avéraient Et puis sur les marqueurs de système, alors évidemment, les problèmes d'inflammation de bas grade, les problèmes de stress oxydatif et puis les problèmes d'inflammation du tissu adipeux. Donc, nous avons toute une batterie de marqueurs très intéressants et qui vont être guidés par les questionnaires que l'on a fait à la base. En pratique, une fois qu'on a fait ces questionnaires et individualisé un petit peu le conseil, on a essayé de trouver un protocole de base qui pouvait s'attaquer à ce triptyque dysfonction mitochondriale, stress oxydatif et neuroinflammation. On a travaillé sur un premier protocole qui a associé à la fois des complexes d'acides aminés branchés associés aux alcalinisants pour traiter l'acidose métabolique. Ensuite, on a associé comme antioxydant, anti-inflammatoire de référence sur le plan nutritionnel du resveratrol. Et là, on a travaillé toujours pendant 15 jours à 400 mg de resveratrol par jour. Ensuite, on a rajouté pour optimiser la dysfonction mitochondriale du coenzyme Q10 à 200 mg. Et enfin, on a utilisé des modulateurs des protéines de stress avec 900 à 1000 mg de modulateurs de protéines de stress et toujours pendant 15 jours. On a vraiment resserré le protocole et on l'a proposé comme protocole de base d'attaque de ces problématiques-là. Et on a échangé avec toutes les populations qui ont été vues par les médecins qui travaillent avec nous. Et on a pu observer, on est en période observatoire de cette vision-là, et on a pu observer des résultats qui, s'ils étaient pris précocement, c'est-à-dire avant les 2 à 3 mois d'évolution de ces fatigues post-Covid, des résultats qui parfois sont remarquables. Dès la première semaine, on a vraiment des améliorations de plus de 50% de la fatigue, et on a vu des véritables arrêts, des guérisons de ces syndromes post-Covid. Donc, à partir de là, bien sûr, on en profitait pour conseiller l'adoption d'une alimentation dite barrière aujourd'hui, notamment riche en oméga 3 et en polyphénol. Également, la mise en place d'une activité physique santé en respectant l'activité et le crossover pain qui permet aux gens de comprendre qu'il ne faut pas dépasser la dose et permettre aux gens de réoxygéner les tissus. Ça, c'est un élément très, très important. Et ensuite, on a proposé des méthodes de cohérence cardiaque pour ceux qui n'avaient pas travaillé sur le plan respiratoire, sur le plan de la récupération au niveau des syndromes d'hyperventilation. C'est dans ces cadres-là qu'on obtient les meilleurs résultats. Alors, bien évidemment, là, nous sommes en enquête observationnelle. On a regroupé un certain nombre de cas hyper intéressants. Et on travaille avec un certain nombre d'organismes qui sont en train d'évaluer l'efficacité que l'on pourrait avoir de prendre en charge les personnes présentant ces syndromes post-Covid, ces Covid longs. Et nous allons proposer de définir le protocole qui nous paraît le mieux adapté, avec bien sûr des modulations à faire en fonction de l'individualisation du conseil et effectuer une évaluation dans un cadre réglementaire, parce qu'il nous semble que d'après nos observations, nous n'en avons pas fini, bien sûr, avec cette pandémie, on le sait tous, mais on n'en a sûrement pas fini dans nos consultations avec les séquelles post-Covid et les Covid longs. Pour nous, on en aura pour de longs mois et probablement de longues années. Je vous remercie.
Beaucoup. Merci, cher ami, professeur Didier, pour cette excellente présentation. Et ce que j'allais dire maintenant, est-ce qu'on peut passer un petit peu à des résumés? Ceux qui ont fait des présentations en anglais, s'ils peuvent faire just a short abstract for our colleague. And also for Leila El-Thani, si if you can translate Amin for Leila El-Thani, the conference of presentation of Professor Didi. Si vous êtes d'accord, bien sûr. Sinon, on passe aux discussions.
Bon, je pense que discussion, c'est bien. Si, comme je suis incapable de faire un bon résumé en anglais.
Non, c'est pas vous. Je le demande soit à Youssef.
Non, mais je pourrais la fournir.
Je pense qu'on peut passer à la discussion. De toute façon, les gens lisent quand même l'anglais s'ils ne parlent pas bien. Donc,
d'accord.
Oui,
okay. Oui d'accord.
Il faudrait libérer votre écran, Didier, s'il vous plaît.
Ça y est, voilà, arrêtez.
Donc, on s'attendait à avoir certaines questions de la part des participants via Facebook, mais jusqu'à présent, on n'en a pas parce qu'il y a des gens qui, à chaque fois, rentrent, de nouvelles personnes qui rentrent. Mais ce qu'on peut faire maintenant, c'est la discussion entre nous et on invite aussi le panel de discussion qui, normalement, devait être constitué de Marwan, professeur Marwan, qui n'est pas là. Donc là, nous avons Leila El-Tani. Voilà, Sahar Zghaloul, Fethi Ben Slama de Tunisie. Et voilà, et avec bien sûr tous les intervenants qui sont là, présents, qui écoutent et qui ont présenté. Donc, la discussion est ouverte pour un petit quart d'heure, bien sûr.
So we invite our colleagues of the discussion panel, so Leila and Professor Sahar and Professor Fethi Ben Slama from Tunisia to lead the discussion. If you have questions, also for the other speakers, if you have questions or remarks to our speakers now, Jacques, Didier, and Youssef, so we can ask your questions.
Perhaps. Okay.
Allez-y, Jean-Michel. Yes. Jean-Michel, vas-y.
Yes, Jean-Michel, thank you very much for your speak. And some small remarks. I agree quite with Jacques about the caution for vitamin D and omega-3. I will present some data after, and I agree with him. We have a lack of good randomized study for these two nutrients. But I think there is probably something positive to use these nutrients. Secondly, for the talk of our friend, where is it?
Youssef or Didier?
Yes, no, just before. When we speak about the Western diet, always we have a confusion between Western diet and meat consumption. It's not exactly the same. So it's very important to say that Western diet is a complex diet with a lot of things, too much sugars and so on, and fries and so on, and sometimes too much red meat. But we can focus only on red meat to compare the Mediterranean diet, which is a very good diet, and Western diet, which is sometimes very bad, but we cannot resume to meat. And the last remark is about my friend Didier. It's very interesting to see that you have some preliminary studies about the nutrients and in the COVID long to COVID. But it would be interesting to have a good randomized clinical trials, because there is a spontaneous improvement after COVID, long COVID. So I think you have to begin some good randomized double-blind clinical trials. So it's a remark, but I think there is probably something which is interesting in this approach of long COVID. Thanks.
Merci Jean-Michel.
Merci Jean-Michel. Thank you, Jean-Michel. I think Leila would to say something.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Amin. May I thank the speakers for their valuable talks at the beginning. I would like to ask Dr. Jacques regarding vitamin D. You said that the evidence is weak for its effect on COVID-19 infection. There are studies actually conflicting on the use of the supplement. Do you think that it can be used as an adjunct treatment for those who are infected?
Okay, it's an important question, but the response is not so clear-cut and not so straightforward. In fact, probably it's useful to try to have normal concentrations of vitamin D. That's a point. I'm quite convinced that it would be useful. Not an overdose, of course, but a normalization of concentration first. Second, we are able today to correctly dose zinc, selenium, etc. And I really think that it's especially useful to have a dosage of the concentrations of some micronutrients and to correct any deficiency. It's true during COVID as during other illnesses, but I think it's especially useful during COVID. Concerning omega-3 fatty acids, we'll have to wait the ongoing ACT in the next months, but I think it could be probably, it's not deleterious, and it may be useful to increase concentration of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. Until which dosage, I don't know, okay? I don't know, maybe around 1 gram a day, but it's empirical. We have no clear data about that. Probably more than current recommendation for normal population, okay? But which dosage, we don't know. Probably, in fact, what could be useful would be to have an omega-3 index as proposed for cardiovascular risk by Harris and Fontecchi. But it's costly. There are only 3 labs in the world who perform this dosage. But if we have an omega-3 index to be around 8%, could be useful. But we have no proof of that.
8% of the total calories, you mean?
Yeah, 8% of the ratio of EPA plus DHA on total fatty acids in erythrocytes membranes.
Yes.
But it's empirical and no proof.
Okay. I had also a question about the dietary intake that you presented in the Italian study. They reflected adherence more to the Mediterranean diet while they consumed more home-baked sweets.
Yeah. It's a little bit balanced. In fact, the Mediterranean dietary index increases. That's right. There are some aspects which suggest that the increase some foods belonging to Mediterranean diet, traditional foods. But on the other side, they increase sweets at home, etc. But they decrease processed food. In general, I was very surprised by the results. I was waiting for the contrary, for a more Western diet because we observed increasing weight, etc., in quite a lot of people, and I was surprised by the data. But maybe it's what is true for Italian people is not true for other people. Okay, we don't know. So data are there. I have no other specific comment.
And we don't know if it was linked to the socioeconomic status. You know, I don't know if the wages were raised in Italy during the lockdown as other European countries also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Ok, est-ce qu'on peut maintenant conclure un petit peu sur la diète méditerranéenne et Covid et un petit peu faire un petit brin de lumière sur ces différences de prévalence entre nord et sud? Si quelqu'un a une, parce que je sais qu'il y a des hypothèses maintenant, mais est-ce qu'on peut discuter? Je crois, Jean-Michel, vous avez quelque chose à dire.
I have not seen some good statistical data about the prevalence. We know that there is less COVID-19 in Africa, but I have not seen good statistical data about that. I think probably the diet is a main factor, but we have also to have in mind that there is the age, and the age is lower in Africa. Secondly, there are probably genetic factors, and we don't know exactly which are the difference about some genetic factors. So it's very difficult to conclude about the causes of the difference between north and south of Mediterranean.
C'est sûr, la pyramide d'âge n'est pas la même entre le nord et le sud, les pyramides d'âge, c'est sûr. Ça, c'est parmi les facteurs qui... Oui.
About obesity, it's quite interesting because as you know, in north of Africa, the obesity is quite higher than in France. Or I think it's quite the same. So why there is less COVID-19 in north of Africa? Also, there is a high prevalence of obesity. I don't know why.
In North, high prevalence in North?
In North Africa, in France, the prevalence is not very high for obesity. It's only 15% of the population.
Maybe a comment. In fact, I agree with Jean-Michel Leclerc that it's very difficult to compare the prevalence of COVID between countries, because there are quite a lot of factors which may affect the prevalence. Of course, the mean age of the population, whether it's a population which travels or not, the ability to be protected or not toward COVID because of mask, because of lockdown, because of quite a lot of things. I think it's very difficult. Maybe what could be more easily compared is the severity of or not of COVID in population of same age, in same socially similarly between countries, more than prevalence between countries.
Okay.
Do you have statistical data, Jacques?
No, I've not.
Maybe Mourad Rasfa, Professor Mourad, was working a lot in this aspect.
Yes.
Can
you tell us something?
Well, I would say just in the next presentation, probably I will talk about many of these aspects that are related to Africa. There are many aspects that we will outline, and basically they don't have absolutely, or they don't have to do all the time with nutrition. There are many other demographic and epidemiologic question that will be discussed later, I hope.
Thank you.
But I think regarding nutrition, even there is no conclusive data on Mediterranean diet, relationship between Mediterranean diet and COVID-19. In general, globally, I think that the southern shore of the Mediterranean is applying Mediterranean diet, I think,
yes,
than the northern shore.
Yes.
There is good differences, I think. This is, I think, due to traditional lifestyle, I think, and other factors. But in this case, in the case of Mediterranean diet, I think it is more applied by southern shore of the Mediterranean.
Yes.
I think, what do you think about this?
Probably also very some factor which was very previous in the life. As Jacques has said, breastfeeding is probably something which can have an effect because it have a role in the development of the immune system. So we don't know exactly, but perhaps some very early factors.
Yes, if I may, if I may,
yeah,
of course there is. It's not easy to assess the effect of Mediterranean diet, just as Jack said and other colleagues, because if you're talking about the adherence score, it's not enough. It's an aggregate score. So we are trying to go in depth in terms of omega-3 score, I don't know, whatever flavonoid score, okay, if we can, and we have the ability to do that. Because you find also in the same country, the 3 studies that I exposed in Croatia, in Italy and Spain, you have a lot of difference in adherence. In the same country. I don't know if it's, how far is it from the Mediterranean? Is it a question of a distance or a habit or whatever? But there is a variation within the country about applying or adhering. So it's very hard. I'm thinking about the Tunisia case for 2 reasons. The first one is Tunisia was, I don't know, kind of protected in the beginning of the epidemic. I mean, it scores very low in terms of COVID-19, and it has high adult and juvenile obesity rates compared to Morocco and to France also. And after a while, something changed in Tunisia. Mortality has risen, prevalence has risen. This is a case, I mean, to study if we can do it at least retrospectively, or if we can do it, prospectively, would be better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
But what we know, and I think I will conclude with this, what we know is that deleterious diet, fast foods and so on, sugar diets, etc., are a risk factor for metabolic diseases. And all those metabolic diseases are also a risk factor, and very important risk factor for COVID-19. So I think that even if we don't have studies about Mediterranean diet and its relationship with COVID-19, probably there are also some other types of diets which are very good for immune system. I think that we can conclude here that deleterious diets, sugar diets, trans fat diets, etc., are very, very deleterious and may constitute a risk factor, a lifestyle risk factor for COVID-19.
I agree.